Good afternoon to everyone following us. There are people from all over the world with us. I thank you all very much for your participation. First of all, I would like to ask for your understanding as we have no translation for this activity to Portuguese, which will be conducted entirely in English. We will use automatically the closed caption function to add understanding with simultaneous transcription in English. I'm very happy and a bit anxious too, I confess, to share this roundtable with these researchers who are references in the field of migration studies. I feel privileged to be able to co-organize this activity. I would like to thank Professors Nina Glick-Schiller and Aisha Chagla for their availability. A special thanks to Bella Feldman-Bianco, who not only accepted the task of being a discussant, but also helped to make this panel possible. Thank you very much, Bella. The proposal for this closing roundtable, following all the activities of the Fontieki Quasi Forum, is to have a more informal discussion. It's not an academic conference following all the formal protocols, but a more spontaneous exchange. So I would like to ask everyone who is following us to write in the YouTube chat from where you are watching us and your respective affiliations. Make your comments, send questions, and later I will read it to our guests. I'm Thiago Rangel, a PhD candidate in the graduate program in sociology at the University of São Paulo, and I'm part of the Forum's organizing committee. The idea of this discussion with the international guest was to bring these two unavoidable references in migration studies with an interface in urban issues to the debate here held here in São Paulo and Brazil. It is of utmost importance to further circulate the academic debate in the Brazilian context, as they suggest, bringing new approaches and theoretical frameworks to migration studies. Here, it's specifically about using the urban lens, establishing a series of connections between migrants and non-migrants, between process of dispossession, displacement, and urban regeneration, relating spaces and socioeconomic process around the world. It's worth mentioning that Bella Feldman herself has a long and fruitful discussion and interlocution with these authors, with an extensive publication, and it is constant dialogue with them. Beyond the international and global reach that Bella's production achieves, it is noteworthy that in the regional academic debate, she was the one who brought to our debate some of the concepts and discussion that Nina and Aisha propose. Bella, for sure, is the author's main interlocutor in the Brazilian academic debate. In other words, it's a pleasure and I feel honored to make this mediation with researchers that are obligatory literature in this field. I am part of the City and Labor Research Team, coordinated by Professor Vera Teles, whom I also thank for introducing me to the writings of these authors. If my memory serves me correctly, it was the notion developed by Nina and Andreas Riemer about methodological nationalism that was the first text that we debated in the group coordinated by Vera in 2010 when I joined this team. Then, in 2011, Nina and Aisha co-edited the book Locating Migration, and Vera, very tuned into the international publication, as always, immediately presented this book that had a great influence on the research carried out by the collective. The book Locating Migration, which includes a series of articles by a wide range of their interlocutors, such as Bella Feldman herself, proposes, in general terms, an epistemic shift in the way of approaching migration issues through an urban lenses. Reading this book and their other articles was essential for us to deepen the debate on the importance of city making and the urban scale in migration studies. It is worth saying that the group coordinated by Professor Vera concentrates a series of research on city making, and that the subject of migration is not what gives the framework to this collective, but different approaches to the production of the contemporary city and its conflicts. Under the coordination of Professor Vera, debates about the new urban illegalisms, mass incarceration, housing issues, as well as transnational migrations are in the scope of this collective to which I am affiliated. Aisha, Nina, and Bella are not simply leading-edge researchers very engaged in producing quality content, but they are also positioned themselves on the front line of confronting and criticizing the process of dispossession and displacement, which subtract rights from those people who are on the move across the different borders on the globe. I believe that this debate today assumes a strategic centrality in guiding and questioning the ways in which we are elaborating our reflections on transnational migrations. I would like to point out that these authors refuse to naturalize borders, be they the borders of nation states or borders internal to the cities themselves. They always question and analyze the different hierarchies of power in which migrant and non-migrant population are inserted in time and in the specific historical conjuncture in which we live. The way they set up the research problem is epistemologically strategic because they deactivate some of the traps that city and migration researchers often fall into when working with migrants in the key of binarity and difference. We are convinced of the importance of bringing this discussion to this forum, open to a broad and diverse audience of researchers, migrants, public policy operators, among all those who are interested in the place and importance of the migrant presence in the city. Before we start with the roundtable itself, I invite the curator, Karina Quintanilla, to give a brief presentation about this forum, to share a quick introduction about the third edition of the International Fórum Fronteira Quase, Cross Borders. I remind you that after our panel, Professor Arthur Matuk, General Coordinator of the Forum, he will make some considerations about this addition to the forum, closing our activity. Please, Karina.
Thank you, Thiago. I am Karina Quintanilla, and I am a PhD candidate in the graduate program in sociology at the University of Campinas, UNICAMP, and I feel really honored to be part of this closing event of the third edition of the International Fórum Fronteira Quase, Cross Borders, Fronteiras Cruzadas in Portuguese. As part of the organizing commission of this event, I would like to say we are thrilled to be with you all connected, and especially between the hubs from Vienna, New York, São Paulo, with very special guests, Nina Glick-Schiller, Aisha Saglar, and Bella Feldman-Bianco. In this 5 minutes introduction, I will share a little bit of what we have been doing. So the forum has been constituted as an interdisciplinary, social, artistic, and multicultural academic initiative since 2017 at the University of São Paulo. Fronteira Quase means in Haitian Creole, crossed boundaries. And our story is really connected to the influence of migrants from Haiti in São Paulo, in special the União Social dos Imigrantes Haitianos, called USI. It is the result of the endeavor of a wide network of researchers in close cooperation with social movements, migrant associations, students, social workers, lawyers, cultural spaces, and research groups from Brazil and abroad, especially from those from Latin America, Canada, and Europe. This forum has the general coordination of Professor Arthur Matuk in collaboration with Professor Vera Teles, Professor Paulo Daniel Fará, and all of them professors from University of São Paulo, and also Professor Patrícia Vilém, from the Research Center Abdelmalak Sayad, Unimontes, Minas Gerais. We are advancing with an organizing scientific commission and also an organizing commission, and I would have to mention the name of a lot of people that made this forum possible, in special this year. For this event, we counted with the support of CAPES, which is a Brazilian funding agency from the federal government, and we also had the support from the School of Communications and Arts at the University of São Paulo. From November 24th to today, we organized the third edition of this event with more than 400 subscribers to our program. And during the 4 months, we had a diverse range of international guest conferences, 4 cycles of debates, each one organized by a different research group from the University of São Paulo and UNICAMP, working groups with informal migrant workers, and we organized a cultural event that will be held tomorrow with 5 immigrant artists living in São Paulo and Campinas. I have to thank all my colleagues that are working behind the screens, and I have to mention our partners from the group, Cidade de Trabalho, from Vera Teles that Thiago just mentioned it, in the figure of Vera and Thiago, that made this roundtable possible. Also the group Diversitas at the University of São Paulo, Universidade em Transformação, all of them from USP, and also the group Metamorphoses of the Labor World that I am part in UNICAMP. Lab Performance, Diaspotix, Movite, and also Si Yo Puedo, Migramundo, Promigra, Theater, Oficina, Bibliaspa, and the Migration Interdisciplinary Research Group from the Ottawa University, Canada. With the support of all of these groups, we invited people from diverse backgrounds to discuss the theme of transnational migration and social transformations. We had guests from Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Mexico, Haiti, Trinidad y Tobago, Canada, Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, Guinea-Bissau, Democratic Republic of Congo, Senegal, Morocco, Spain, Russia, Palestine, and Syria, and now also from Turkey and the United States. In resume, during the last 4 months, the third Fonseca Kawase Forum was the meeting point for a participating public, especially from Brazil, interested in thinking and acting together on new challenges regarding the rights of expelled, displaced, refugee populations, considering the accelerated process of a multidimensional crisis we are facing globally. In this 7th of April 2021, we are facing one of the biggest challenges with a global pandemic crisis hitting our countries and producing drastic political economic consequences. Especially in Brazil, we have current more than 300,000 of deaths by COVID-19, and our city, São Paulo, is the epicenter of the contaminations in the world. Considering this drastic conjuncture, the Forum aims to cross borders of nationalisms to understand how researchers, students, artists, public managers, workers of various categories, social movements, and human rights organizations can collaborate with migrants in the face of a context constituted by systematic violation of rights, labor precarious, and dispossession process, with alarming expressions of racism, xenophobia, and white supremacism. Therefore, the Forum has designated space to promote the exchange of knowledge, expanding local and global networks and resistance. Stimulated by the potential to connect with people that are interested to overcome these challenges, I would like to encourage everybody to use freely the chat to present yourselves and to leave comments and questions so we can establish side of the screen on the YouTube. If you need a certificate for this event, please register your name at our presence list, and I'll also leave on the chat our email of the Forum so we can still be in touch. I hope you all enjoyed this roundtable that we consider really strategic on issues that we have been discussing along these 3 editions of the Fonseca Kawase Forum till now. I also hope we can plan more activities together in the nearby future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karina. Our audience comes from a lot of places in the world. We have people from Universidade de Barcelona, USP, from Lisboa, Diaspotix, Rio de Janeiro, from Ribeirão Preto, from Itajaí, Dominican Republic, Rio Grande do Sul, the urban Quilombo in Bexiga, from UNILA, from UFMG, Minas Gerais, Pernambuco, Equator, also from geography in Rio, and the collective Si Yo Puedo. Well, we have more than 70 people following us, so I think that's a success live and discussion. Thank you for your words, Karina. Before we continue, I would like to reaffirm my thanks to all those who have contributed in some way to making the forum possible. Also, a special thanks to Daniel Perseguin, who is supporting us with the technical part, and Pedro Corrales, who helps me here in the mediation. Of course, we cannot forget to thank Karina herself and the professors Arthur Matuk, Patricia Villain, Paulo Fará, and Vera Teres. Now, let's start the roundtable of the day properly. Before passing the floor to them, I would like to introduce Nina, Aisha, and Bella. Nina Glick-Schiller is Emeritus Professor at the University of Manchester, UK, and the University of New Hampshire in the USA. She is a research associate at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology and is co-editor of Anthropological Theory. She developed a comparative and historical perspective on migration, transnational process, and social relations, diasporic connection, and long-distance nationalism. Her concern has been to explore differences of power within transnational social fields in relationship to the constitution of gender, race, class, status, poverty, the second generation, citizenship, and national identity. Her most recent book project developed migration theory by examining the relation between the migrant and the city. These books contest the methodological nationalism of most migration studies that remain fixed within the comparative framework of individual nation states and state policies. She published over 100 articles and 10 books, include one co-edited with Aisha Chaglar, that's Locating Migration, Rescaling Cities and Migrants, that's from 2011, as I told before, and other co-authored with Aisha, that is Migrants and City Making, Dispossession, Displacement, and Urban Regeneration, that's from 2018. They developed a multi-escalar and conjunctural analysis of dispossession, displacement, and urban regeneration, this last book. Well, Aisha is a professor at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at the University of Vienna and a permanent fellow at the IWM, Institute for Human Science. She received her PhD at McGill University, Department of Anthropology and Habilitation Sociology and Social Anthropology at the Free University in Berlin. Before joining the University of Vienna, she was a professor at the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology at Central European University in Budapest. She has widely published on the process of migration, urban restructuring, transnationalization and the state, and of dispossession and displacement. Her most recent comparative empirical research addressed the location of migrants in city-making process, especially in disempowered cities, as this book that I just said before. And Bella, she is a PhD in anthropology at Columbia University with postdoctoral studies in history at Yale University. She's a professor of anthropology at UNICAMP, Universidade of Campinas, and a founding member and first director of its Center for the Study of International Migrations, CEMI. Among other distinctions, she received the Gilberto Velho Academic Excellence Award, the Roquete Pinto Award for her contributions to Brazilian Anthropology Award, and the Zeferino Vaz Award for Academic Excellence. Her research and publications focus on issues related to culture and power, with emphasis on migration and displacements in an ethno-historical and comparative perspective. She is a past president of the Brazilian Association of Anthropology from 2011 to 2012, a past co-chair of the Latin American Council of Social Science Study Group on Migration, Culture, and Politics from 2011 to 2013, as well as of the AAA, American Anthropological Association's World Anthropology Committee from 2012 to 2013. She is currently the chair of the ABAS Committee on Migration and Displacements, a counselor at the National Council on Immigration, where she represents the Society for the Advancement of Science, and an elected member of the World Council of Anthropological Associations Board, among other activities. I'm honored to have this presence, actually. Thank you very much. And now I pass the floor to Nina and Aisha, please. Don't forget to open your microphone.
So, can we have the PowerPoint? Okay. Can you do view screen? View slides? So, yes. Okay. I'd like to thank Tiago, Karina, Professor Matuk, and Bella Feldman-Bianco for helping and inviting us and arranging the opportunity for Aisha and I to share our joint work together. I'd just like to clarify something. Bella has always been part of this discussion, and our first challenge to theorize displacement came from Bella's work. It goes back and forth. We believe in collective, collaborative work. So today we're going to speak about reconfiguring transnational migration studies, a multiscalar and conjunctural approach, trying to explain what that means. I'm going to do the first half of the presentation, and Aisha will do the second. Can you do the next slide, please? Really, what I'd like to draw your attention to is that the transnational framework for the study of migration began as a critique of migration studies. We, Linda Bash, Christina Zanten-Blanc, and I, in 1992 and 1994, began publishing the results of conversations that had been going on between us, as well as with Bella, for a long time. We were very discontented with the state of migration studies, and this is important to think about because it only looked at what was happening within the borders of individual nation states, and we could see there was this gap between how migrants were actually living their lives, which was across borders, and the way mainstream theory was talking about their lives, which was only in relationship to the state to which they had migrated. We, from the beginning, stressed that one had to have a global perspective on migration, and that meant looking at the restructuring of capitalism. At that moment, we paid particularly attention to structural adjustment policies that were destroying the economies of the states of origin of the migrant populations that were coming to the United States and Europe. Agriculture and industry was being restructured so that national economies no longer could employ and feed their people. In Haiti, where I worked, you could buy an apple from the state of Washington in the US. You could buy industrial produced rice or chickens from the US, but you couldn't buy local produce in the marketplace very often, or it was rare. So we tried to theorize this. Well, in this theorization, in this global framework that we presented, there were some weaknesses. There was a lack of view of this ongoing sense of capitalism being adjusted, restructured over the many centuries. That wasn't theorized, nor was there a theory of space. So we spoke about the nation state, the United States, and New York City as if they were the same thing. We had no language to talk about how different places get restructured within more global processes and how governance was getting restructured And we had no real way of linking migrants and non-migrants within the same framework. We focused on migrants. Next slide, please. What happened next between the 1980s and ongoing now was that a transnational migration industry developed. And as it did, a number of what I consider dead-end approaches developed, which I've been critiquing for the past 20 years, Aisha and I both. In effect, while people followed the lives of people across borders, their units of analysis remained bounded. Their units of analysis followed people between homeland and new land, postulating a diasporic or transnational community. Now, what was wrong with that? What happened when you talk about a transnational community? You assume that all migrants have a single identity and a single way of life, and that is bounded by their ethnic identity, by that they have a single culture and a single non-changing history. This kind of outlook is what reflects methodological nationalism, where you assume that the nation state is the unit of society and that each person is linked to a single identity with a single nation state. Extending it across borders just extends a single ethnic lens to all people of common origin. So with these dead-end concepts and this entire industry that developed was unable to look at the broader transformations that were going on in the world and in the lives of migrants. And there are multiple ways of living within and across borders. Next slide, please. It's very important to think reflexively about the concepts we have. So to understand why transnational migration scholarship developed in this way, despite the efforts of Linda and Christina and I to take a global perspective and talk about the restructuring of capitalism, to understand that we have to think about what time it was in terms of history. This was an era of neoliberal restructuring all over the world. And as that happened, people glorified concepts of flows of capital, people, ideas, media. They postulated that the nation state was disappearing, and a whole globalization scholarship began without a concept of ongoing institutions of power and the organization of power across borders and how that affects life everywhere and what neoliberalism was actually about and who benefited. Next slide, please. It was in response to this that Aisha and I began to develop a new analytical framework that could move beyond transnational studies. We've brought all this scholarship together, which is a scholarship of 20 years of work in our recent book, almost 20 years of work, in our recent book, Migrants and City Making. There are some key concepts in this book that have helped us develop this analysis. I list them here: capital accumulation by dispossession, multiscalar analysis, changing historical conjuncture, and conjunctural transformations of governance. I'm going to speak about the first two concepts, and Aisha will pick up and develop the second two concepts. Next slide, please. Now, in order to make this come to life, I'm going to use illustrations from the lives of friends of mine who I've worked with for about the past 20 years. I do this with their permission. I've gone over what I'm saying in this paper about their lives with them, and they've taught me a lot about the whole concept of multiscalar analysis and accumulation by dispossession as we've worked together to understand what's happening with their lives. This couple is Helen and Hubert Simarwari, and what you see here is a picture of them holding a picture of their children. When they were forced to flee from Goma in the Congo, they had to leave behind their 7 children, and they built a movement across time and space to bring those children to Manchester, New Hampshire, where they are living. And so Aisha and I faced the question, how do we understand their lives? Can we just talk about their daily lives? What does that mean? What kind of structures of power and what kind of what kind of agency are they asserting within these structures of power in relationship to building the networks that are part of their lives? What are these structures, and how can we study them? As you can see here on the slide, Manchester, New Hampshire, which is the largest city in northern New England, pictured on the slide, but it only has 107,000 people when we started in the year 2000, and somewhat more, but not that much more now. I know that to people living in Sao Paulo, that feels like a neighborhood block, but this is a major city in New Hampshire. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So I just want to define our terms. First, I'm going to talk about dispossession. Now, dispossession is a concept that we can take back to work by Marx and his co-associates. It was called, he spoke of primitive capital accumulation, a kind of accumulation of capital that exists outside the actual labor process, but is very important to understand how capitalism profits and works off the extraction of resources and human labor. Marx looked at forces of primitive accumulation both inside Europe and in the colonies that European powers had conquered. He noted the theft of land and property in Europe by what he called, quote, ruthless terrorism, as well as by the use of law. So by legal and illegal means, both in Europe and in the colonies, where he noted the violent appropriation of land, resources, and labor in the form of enslavement. So it was this accumulation of capital that was experienced both by people in Europe and people around the world that Marx was theorizing with this concept. And he also noted that this leads to displacement. In other words, displacement doesn't mean just people moving around. It means people whose lives are turned upside down by the processes of capital accumulation. Next slide, please. Now, David Harvey, more recently than Marx, in a series of writings in the beginning of the 20th century, began to speak of accumulation by dispossession to talk about the processes of what Marx had called primitive accumulation, and to point out that these processes never went away. It wasn't just at the founding moment of capitalism, but ever since that there has been the appropriation of land, resources, the seizing of people's homes, the seizing of public goods, the seizing of bodies. That this is an ongoing aspect of capitalism, and beginning with the 1980s and the processes of what's generally called neoliberal capitalism, these processes became more and more primary as a way of accruing capital all around the world. And neoliberal privatization often means the taking of common property, common goods, public services, public resources, and privatizing them, making them available to people only through paying fees rather than having a right through their state to access them. More and more, the access to service became financialized, became a profit in and of a form of making capital in and of itself by packaging the fees that and fines that come along with these services, and making each aspect of a process of accessing something people need another way of charging people and making money and creating debt. When we stand back, therefore, we see that the very processes that make people move are the same process that's creating worldwide a small handful of people getting very rich and downward social mobility for large numbers of people and increased homelessness. Therefore, by using this concept, we have a concept that allows us to understand what are happening to people, whether or not they're classified as migrants. They're being dispossessed. I use the word dispossariat just as a way of reminding us that that rather than migrants being different than non-migrants in their plight, they're both experiencing a relationship to the processes of capital accumulation. Next slide, please. There's another concept that we find quite useful, and in trying to sort out the Hubert and Helene's story, and that's the concept of multiscalar. It allows us to rethink migration studies, and it allows us to rethink how the ethnographies of daily life, because it allows us to situate each of us within multiple networks of unequal power: economic, political, social, cultural, religious, and military power that we're connected to in a myriad of ways. These networks have different trajectories, they link to different institutions, but they interconnect and they change over time. And once again, they allow us to put aside the concept of migrant and non-migrant and look at the relationships that we have to each other. And this is a picture of, you can just take this picture of Helene and I. Helene's teaching me how to cook tilapia. It's a picture of two people interacting in a daily life activity. It's also a publicity picture that was taken as part of the campaign to bring Helene's and Hubert's children across from the Congo to Manchester. It's in that sense, it was a picture that was part of media networks. It was a picture that was broadly disseminated. It was a picture that was given to Congress people. I'm going to trace some of the multiple networks that extend around the world that link to this frying of fish in a kitchen in Manchester, New Hampshire. Next slide, please. Okay, let me therefore just take you a little into this story so that I can, how much more time do I have?
You still have 15 minutes.
Okay, great, perfect. Okay, I'm going to just take you through a little bit of this story. So why were Hubert and Helene in Manchester? Hubert had been a human rights, he began as a banker, working in a bank, but his whole area was in the Eastern Congo was overrun by competing militias who went around impressing youth into forced labor in mines, as well as in militias, and in a contestation over mineral-rich land. The land in the Eastern Congo has multiple kinds of resources, including resources that go into making cell phones, coltan and other precious metals. So it's a battleground of theft in which in which various countries and corporations are trying to steal resources. And Hubert and Helene, trying to raise their children, found themselves in the middle of this. Hubert became a rights worker. He was beaten and mutilated and left for dead, and he had to leave. Way over in Manchester, New Hampshire, he had a transnational network, a friend who had come to Manchester. Why did he come to Manchester? Because in the 1990s, technical boom developed in this small city that had been an industrial city. The picture on the bottom is a picture of textile mills that built Manchester but were defunct by the middle of the 20th century. And the city and the whole city center had been virtually abandoned. However, small technological firms started to build computer.com industries. Hubert's friend Albert was able to get a job in one of these industries after going to school in Manchester. He therefore had the money to help Hubert and Helene escape from the Congo when they won a migrant lottery and were able to get a visa to come to the United States. That's the beginning of the story. At this point, we see migration networks. We see what's often described in transnational migration, friendship networks, bringing and chain migration, people leaving from one country to another. Although we can see that we have to see that he's fleeing a process of accumulation of capital by theft and war. What happens next? They don't have enough money to bring their children. Hubert and Helene arrive in debt. Albert, by this time, has lost his job because the dot-com bubble burst. There was massive unemployment in Manchester. The regeneration that had begun to take place, stalled. Hubert could barely find a job. He found a job in a small textile factory. This textile factory was owned by a multinational conglomerate. When Aisha and I began to look at these almost abandoned buildings in and around Manchester, at first we didn't pay too much attention to them. Then we realized they were part of multinational corporations that were benefiting by the low taxes, low wage labor in Manchester. So we have more networks. We have multi-scalar networks that were part of the restructuring of the economy of Manchester. Meanwhile, the city fathers of Manchester decided to gentrify the city, to restructure the city, to try to attack investment capital and rebuild the city center, hoping that then firms would come. What happened then? They had to borrow the money. The capital didn't come. So to rebuild the city center in the hope that if you build it, they will come, they put the city into debt. They also raised the cost of living and housing for most of the people in the city. Hubert and Helene, meanwhile, start to build a campaign to bring their children with my help, with the help of students from the University of New Hampshire. They needed the help of Republican congressmen. They needed a bill passed in Congress to give their children special visas. They needed newspapers. They needed media. They had the help of the Catholic Church. They had the help of born-again Christian minister that became their friend. They had the help of thousands of people. These are all parts of their multi-scalar network, a network we wouldn't see if we only looked at them as trans migrants living in an ethnic field. They did have friends from people from the Congo, and more people from the Congo have continued to come through these networks. But that cannot be the dimensions of this story. nor were they alone in their friendships that extended far beyond ethnic connections. In over 100 interviews that my students and I did with newcoming migrants in Manchester, almost all of them had networks that went far beyond any ethnic ties, and to both migrants and non-migrants. The story continues. They raise a lot of money. They get the visas, but they have to pay for all the legal papers. They get help from a high prestige law firm. They bring the children. They raise all this money. They buy a house with it. They have so much money. They buy a house in an inflated housing market where very old houses that are falling apart are being sold for high prices. This is therefore they enter the economy of restructuring the city of Manchester in terms of the subprime mortgage market. The market crashes. They almost lose their house. They're able, with the help of lawyers, to buy a foreclosed house and abandon their house, but thousands of people in the Manchester area lose their housing, migrants and non-migrants. We watch the process of dispossession go on. We can trace all of this. We find ourselves studying not just Manchester, but a multi-scalar network of finance that circles the globe. We find Manchester is not a unit of analysis, but an entry point. By making a multi-scalar analysis of migrant networks, we start to study multiple institutions of power that are on the ground in Manchester and reach out across the world in many, many different directions. This is what we mean by a multi-scalar analysis. Let me see. Next slide, please. So we have, when we start to think of dispossession, accumulation by dispossession, and I use the term disposaria to try to think about this. We see that people living in that city, as is true of people living around the world, find themselves with different kinds of identities, with different kinds of positionings, with different class positionings, but experiencing a sense of loss, a major kind of sense that their future possibilities are being ripped away, and they look for answers. And more and more, as the 20th century went on, they joined social movements, and they joined social movements. Some of them anti-immigrant movements, some of them extreme nationalist movements, and some of them movements of all dispossessed people, led by people of color and migrants to organize against the forces of dispossession. So through this analysis, we can see we can enter into the discussion of contesting social movements and move from a literature on migration to a literature on transnational communities, to a literature that speaks to the social movements and social challenges of the day. I was just going to take this up and talk about how we understand the transformations of space over time. I think there might be one more slide. Next slide, please. Yes. I just wanted to say before I turn the mic over to Aisha, that the pandemic intensified all these contradictions. And the questions of governance. It intensified the borders and nationalism. It's identified the pressure to migrate, as we see on the southern border in the United States, where people are coming actually not just from the southern border, but from different parts of the world. to come to the U.S. We see it in the people drowning in the Mediterranean day after day, month after month, year after year. Because we see around the world that the pandemic has only intensified these processes of dispossession and displacement. It's also intensified migration industries where people, where whole industries profit from jailing people and containing their bodies. All across the United States, for example, prison systems are being maintained by the immigration services, even with empty beds. Taxpayers' money go to maintain systems to put people into prison, which this is a way of funding state government through the migration industry. So we see the links between the austerity policies on one hand, the fundings of profit-making migration industries on another hand that benefit from these migration laws, and the growing range and anger and desperation around the world. I turn it over to Aisha.
Go ahead, Aisha. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Nina. Thanks a lot. First of all, I would like to also thank Tiago to make this possible, and also, of course, Bella to have accepted to discuss our work, actually what we present. I mean, that is, it's only just a glimpse of the part of the work. So, and I have to also add to join Nina to express that, to tell that how much I actually learned in my participation to ABBA meetings, and also from Bella's work, but in general, the debates and the discussions in Brazil. Let me start. Could you share the slide? Yes. Okay, the first one. Unfortunately, I don't have, so could you also make it big? Yes. Unfortunately, after Nina's colorful pictures and those kind of slides, you have to bear with me. I might be a bore for you. First of all, I would like to start saying that, I mean, we have divided up like that, Nina talking about the multiscalar aspect, and I'm taking with the conjunctural. But the conjunctural analysis, what we are talking about, the conjunctural, actually what we are talking about, temporality. And temporality is a very neglected aspect of transnational migration studies. So I took this actually as an exercise, this roundtable, because of that going over back to transnational migration. I mean, really augment some kinds of the problems that we struggled with, and I think that still continues with this transnational migration studies. I said that it is a neglected, it is a neglected aspect, but it manifests itself in several forms. And why it is important is about how are we going to situate and relate the practices and relations of migrants within what kind of a time frame? This is what we ask. And do we start talking about the quote unquote the times of the migrants, like times of the other, in allusion to discrepant temporalities, which is very fashionable now? Or are we going to start our analysis by assuming that the migrants are the contemporaries of those who are identified as non-migrants and are subject to conjunctural forces as the others, no matter what kind of variations and different histories they bring with? So it is about our starting point. And Nina and I have written about the discontents of different temporal framings in migration scholarship. But today I want to raise the question of temporality in migration studies in relation to the conjunctural analysis, which is a kind of a nutshell using the Clark's a way to assess the intersection of forces, tendencies, forms of power, and relations of domination as they meet within place and time. So we always emphasize place and time, and that is what our work was, actually trying to show that the migration literature in general, but the transnational migration literature also, that had a very problematic understanding of spatiality, or not developed understanding of capturing the complexity of the spatiality and temporality. So within this, it is crucial for us to be able to explore the ways in which migrants and non-migrants can be understood together as actors reconstituting the places they become part of in relation to different trajectories of intersecting power Nina was referring to, expressed in different ways in different places at particular times. So when we speak of conjunctural transformations, we are talking about new realignments in the making and the remaking of political, economic, and cultural life, and new forms of legitimations and contestations. The analysis of which requires of these analysis of these requires an understanding of the ways in which key processes and structures that Nina was referring to as modes of process of capital accumulation are transformed over time. So when we're even dealing with the kind of the narratives, with the contestations, and then how the social, political, economic life are brought together, that we need to connect these kind of those broader processes and structure. So it is about conjunctural analysis, is about tracing the transformations of places over time. But this is neither about tracing a path dependency nor a simple long-term research. Yes, we had a long-term research, but it is it required a particular kind of an analytical lens for the assessment of those transformations as take place not only within our research settings, but also within the global networks of power, which these settings were intimately interconnected, as Nina had shown in her examples. As you'd see that it is, what I'm saying is, might sound abstract, but at the bottom line, if we refer to always the clarity of Stuart Hall, conjunctural transformations are experienced as changing narratives, concepts, political movements, sensibilities, interpersonal relations, and interrelations between governance and other domains of life. So it is about the ways different spheres of life are connected to each other. There is no one way of doing it. And this is very important to look at it, how they are connected, because this is important to understand the hegemonic imaginaries and the subjectivities. It is important, this kind of a perspective is important, first of all, as it enables us to frame and assess the narratives about migrants, and connectedly, the migrants' own self-narratives, be as heroes of development, as self-made entrepreneurs, or as assets of diversity, or as major threat to the social, economic, and political, quote-unquote, well-being of the places they are entangled with. And most importantly, this means that rather than approaching these narratives and interpersonal relations simply as part of the histories of these places or histories of this or that other migrant group within our research setting, we need to approach them in relation to the multiscalar dynamics Nina was talking about, which connects the research settings. This is what we need to understand. We need this because this is how we can understand the opportunities migrants and minorities have to become part of the social, economic, political, cultural lives of cities in multiple ways, whether their participation will be publicly acknowledged, in what terms, within what kind of semantic fields and value regimes. So we need to pay attention to those conjunctures, historical conjunctures, and the conjunctural transformations. Could you put the second slide, please? And in terms of the talking about the conjuncture, I would like to think about it in connection to the location of states in transnational migration studies. I'm pretty convinced that there is a major weakness in the way statehood and state spaces are conceptualized in transnational migration studies. Actually, Nina was also referring to it, that they did not have a kind of a language to address certain variations and dynamics. So I think it is important to emphasize that while going beyond the nation-state borders was necessary for the theorization of transnational social fields, there was too much emphasis put on cross-border spaces without considering paying attention to the reconfiguration of the so-called interior. No matter what is captured there. So it addressed the transnational migration perspective, addressed the transformations the nation states were going through in terms of their activities and presence beyond their borders. They challenged the relevance of the state borders vis-a-vis transnational state activity, reaching out, quote unquote, its members, but the boundedness of the state vis-a-vis to its interior were not put under scrutiny. And this is where that the methodological nationalism critique came. Still, they approached state territoriality, despite the methodological nationalism critique, they approached state territoriality as if it were even and homogeneous in terms of state activity and governance structures. Consequently, the scholarship remained detached from the analysis of the conjunctural dynamics. And this is very much related how you conceptualize that the state, because the processes of uneven neoliberal globalization that altered the parameters of regional, national, and global connectedness and governance of cities or regions at the times these studies gained ground were neglected. They were not that much in a particular way. They were there, that the neoliberal dynamics were addressed actually in the 90s, the beginning of in the emergence of the paradigm, but not later. And so it generally failed to address the way that the places were transformed in relation to and the existing institutions, state territoriality, units of governance and social relations, including migrants, were transferred, how they were transferred within the nation state in varying ways. So I think, so if you look at it that way, there was no conceptual tool for the analysis of emplacement dynamics in different places. This is why I think this paradigm failed to take note of the conjunctural shifts and failed to embark on a conjunctural analysis. I'm not trying to make a kind of a big splash in a glass of water. I think these fault lines are paradigmatic to illustrate the weakness of the transnational perspective vis-a-vis conjunctural analysis, vis-a-vis time perspective, which is itself closely connected to the conceptualization of statehood and state activity. Why is this important? Because first of all, putting aside all that the variegations and the problems of that defining whether there is a kind of a template of that neoliberalism, but within a neoliberal mode of statecraft, we witness the importance of city spaces in the reconfiguration of spaces of statehood. We see that the mutual constitution of city spaces and state spaces in a particular way. So with the decentralization, the rolling back of the state, with the relative unmooring of the cities from the nation state in generating their wealth and power within multiscalar networks of power, in this conjuncture, cities and the local gain a kind of a relative autonomy. Urban governance is reorganized. States are definitely present in this process, but not as the central actors of the governance within the dynamics of those multiscalar networks. So within this architecture of governance, civil society, participatory narratives about the local, empowerment from below come to the forefront in the governance and the governmentality of the cities. Without addressing this neoliberal conjunctural moment, I think it's very difficult to capture the practices, opportunities, and institutional setup of the urban residents' lives, relations to each other, and their narratives about their participation, about their location, migrant and non-migrants alike. Third slide, please. Without, as I said, without attributing a kind of a global unified logic to neoliberalism, I think it is important to go over very quickly about the kinds of the characteristics Nina was referring lively, of course, in relation to the people that she was referring to. But this form of regime characteristics are important to understand the dispossessive forces of this conjunctural moment of urban development, which I think is important to understand the mobilization and solidarities of urban residents, including migrants afterwards. This is a form of a regime marked by the reorganization of the institutions, balance of power in favor of capital. It is marked by the increased marketization, privatization, deregulation, regulation, and market competitiveness, forcing cities, regions to position themselves favorably in networks of power to accumulate wealth and power. They established the ground, for the politics and policies of neoliberal austerity, which is marked by sharp decline in government spending and local government. This is an urban development and growth regime by public expenditure, by public monies extended to corporate capital within public-private partnerships and relying on debt for urban renewal. Nina was also talking about that, how that the debt economy engulfed the people. All these lead to fewer public services, increased cost of living, increased poverty, and increased precarization. In short, it leads to massive dispossessions with a simultaneous wealth concentration. And in increased marketization and the market logic and financialization of lives, households, and housing all have drastic effects on migrants' relationships, connections to different places. They become, migrants, minorities become targets of mortgage credit markets in all the places they are entangled with. Furthermore, within these marketized logics that connect different spheres of life, migrants, but in general the lives of people and their social worth, come to be assessed in terms of their deservingness. So we see these kind of, where these kind of narratives are, how they are related to different areas. So skip the 4th slide, go to 5th, please, Tiago. Okay, I think the conjunctural analysis acquires a renewed importance as we are confronted with another conjunctural transformation, which is marked by rise of authoritarian neoliberal states. So I think that once that the whole neoliberal urban regeneration, neoliberal forms of capital was not taken into consideration, and right now in transnational migration literature, and now actually there's another missing point. We are confronted, what is this kind of authoritarian neoliberal states? We are confronted by the change role and form of the nation state and the authoritarian state practices that systematically escape oversight bodies. This form of regime is marked by decreased separation of powers, increased state control over the judiciary. Think about the politicization of judiciary and the judicialization of politics, and increased state centralization. National state acquires a central role in connecting social and economic political projects in its arbiter and arbitrator role over capital accumulation. So it becomes a prime authority in the spatial distribution of capital investment, in the organization of domestic capital. And in this context, nationalist idioms and selective protectionism reign. But it is important to note that this rule is embedded in very deeply in multiscalar networks of power. So it is not a kind of a return of the nation state and regaining the sovereignty. It is important to note that this new form is different from the developmentalist state or the welfare state before. Production and reproduction of uneven state territory and the connected opportunities continue, as well as neoliberal projects and policies of wealth generation are acted out within multiscalar networks. So what characterizes this form of regime and governance structures is the enmeshing of nationalism, authoritarianism, and neoliberal forms. It is very important to note that what we are observing is now not the replacement of neoliberal dynamics. In fact, the intensification of marketization, privatization, flexibilization of labor are in full gear. But the central state uses its power to advance, reorganize, and maybe you could say steer, dominate those neoliberal projects. This kind of recapturing of the state comes with the reorganization of urban local governance with a determined fight against municipal autonomy. We see these dynamics clearly in what is happening in relation to the mayors, how urban governance becomes less participatory, marked by judicial oppression, or you could say judicial terror, how civil societies fell prey to these reconfigurations, or they are captured in a different way. So in addition to the massive dispossessions, what we have is a drastic deterioration of social, economic, political, and cultural rights, and increased oppression and violence, and also in the name of judicial violence. Of course, this changing architecture of governance and the increasing prominence of nationalist idioms have a drastic impact on the location of migrants, minorities in social and political life. Increasing racialization and criminalizations of migrants all go with this authoritarianism merged with nationalism and neoliberal forms. To recap, and it's a kind of this emerging of new conjuncture is marked by the implementation of emergency politics, authoritarian state mechanisms and policies operating beyond the boundaries of legal inspection and parliamentary control, which we have, Nina and I have talked about it in our recent article on a comparative relational multiscalar analysis. Such politics work through restructuring of the state apparatus around the executive. They work through the increasing prominence of executive orders, sidestepping parliamentary consent, oversight, or accountability. And these alterations affect and inflict intensified forms of political struggle. This is, I'm going through a kind of a detour because what interests me is that why that we have to look at the conjunctural transformations to understand what kind of mobilizations that we are confronted with and why, who is part of what and why. The attempts to undermine the power of mayors are, I think are clear examples of the reordering of the urban governance. I think we should really, we cannot do away, that's, I mean, the transnational migration literature didn't look at neoliberal urban governance, but now we have to look at the urban governance in a different way. Further, Mardin, the border city between Turkey and Syria, in our book, is a striking example of not only the removal of the elected mayor, but of taking control of the city budget by the central state by means of a trustee directly under the control of the government. And this is not a unique case. Turkey is actually a good example to see these conjunctural transformations. Unfortunately, I'm sure that in Brazil that you could find some kinds of resonances. I can think of similar kind of resonances in Europe and a neighboring country, Hungary. Between 2016 and 2019, 95, and after the 2019 local elections, 49 elected mayors were removed in Turkey and replaced by appointed mayors by the central state. So it is very difficult to talk about a kind of the autonomy, a kind of a relative autonomy of the urban governance that we used to talk in today, a couple of decades ago. So you could think that this is only happening in places like Turkey, but unfortunately not. For example, we found that in many other US locations that we looked with, Nina, city authorities no longer participate in decision-making about local regeneration projects, although they may endorse them. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to complicate this picture a little bit further. I think it would be misleading to reduce the engagement with the time aspect, temporality in migration studies, and particularly with conjunctural analysis, only in terms of conjunctural transformations. So I think we need to move a little bit beyond the focus on those transformations as like tectonic shifts. Yes, they are. But the sequence, or better to say, the process and the ground upon which these conjunctural changes are built are important to understand migrants' locations in narratives and politics. As I said before, the centralist authoritarian states are acting upon the neoliberal ordering of cities and upon a neoliberalizing state. Not only neoliberal projects continue, but the authoritarian states and their politics in national idioms come upon the massive injuries of neoliberal austerity. So this is building upon massive injuries. They are acted at massive injuries in terms of dispossession. They are acted upon massively eroded and impoverished livelihoods of people after years of neoliberal austerity. And I think this is important to understand the augmented anger, resentment people feel when confronted with massive oppressions, despair about the future, about the rule of law, and about the further dispossessions that come along with the authoritarian neoliberal state regimes. The next slide, please. And why is it important to focus on the lived conditions upon which these conjunctural shifts are acted out? Within the renationalization of politics, especially in nationalist idioms and selective protectionism, migrants and refugees take center stage. In the context of years of neoliberal urban development, which left cities with higher debt, fewer services, and thousands of urban residents in precarity, displacement, and dispossession, migrants and refugees become the easy scapegoats of the dispossessive effects of those austerity regimes, and particularly of draining public resources and preventing a ready-made explanation to the lack of public services to city residents. Migrants become the target of anti-migrant, anti-refugee social mobilizations within these as I said, within the increasingly racialized and criminalized way. Thus, both the injuries of neoliberal austerity and the renationalization idioms of the authoritarian national neoliberal states feed into this kind of mobilizations. And the last slide, please. But this is not the end of the story. This is what Nina was also referring to. Simultaneous to these anti-migrant nativist mobilizations, same dynamics provide opportunities for migrants, refugees to become part of the social movements for social justice. For example, we found in our research that massive dispossessions and displacement opened opportunities for migrants, refugees, and the dispossessed, quote-unquote, non-migrants, not only to build sociabilities based on domains of commonality in their common conditions of precarity, but also to become part of local politics with broader claims of social justice beyond identity politics. These are not identity politics movements. So it is clear that not only these simultaneous mobilizations are the product of same forces, but they are also characterized by a similar kind of what Koyomji calls frictional heterogeneity, meaning that diverse groups of people, including those that have historically been in conflict with one another, come together to claim, occupy, and appropriate various spaces and their rights. For sure, this coexistence is not without frictions. Constructing solidarities among city residents of diverse social, political, and economic and legal backgrounds and status have been a major challenge to those aspiring to and imagining alternative visions of society. While the heterogeneity of those backgrounds, socializations, and interests in social movements and mobilizations create tensions and frictions, they also provide chances to establish domains of commonality based on dispossession and displacement beyond tolerance of difference, but on the basis of shared affect and aspirations by the residents of the place, migrant and non-migrant. Nina prefers to capture this with the disposaria. I'm not so sure, that's why I'm not using that term, but actually seeing that the common forces, how it provided this polarized politics in terms of also the kind of the frictions within. The participants of these movements, regardless of their status and background, enact solidarities resulting from their shared discontent with the injustices inflicted upon them and act together. They partake in a common act of city-making. Thus, they become political subjects through their city-making activities. The contentious potential of social movements might well lie in this kind of commoning processes. However, in order to be able to see and analyze these dynamics, we need to go beyond the binaries of migrants and non-migrants in our analysis, about the importance of which Nina showed and we talked and dealt in our book. Actually, before just that I conclude, I have to say that I have to thank Tiago that having shown a film in Sao Paulo, this Cambridge hotel, and where that the people who were evicted, who were homeless, were all in that place, and together with the refugees. And at one point, one of them says that, one of the refugees says that, look, you are a refugee in your own country, and you are a refugee in your own place. We are on the same boat in a way, and they act together for finding to escape the eviction and find other places. So no matter, and I think these are important, no matter how transient and fragile they may be, these commonings involved in those social mobilizations, I think, introduce cracks into the existing categories, orders, and subject positions. And I think this is important. This is how light gets in. Let us hope that a similar light will get into the depoliticized and depoliticizing ranks of transnational migration industries. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Aisha. It was very enlightful, your presentation. Thank you. Bella, I think that now you can have the word, please.
Well, thank you very much. So good to hear both of you. First, I want to say that, like Tiago asked me to contextualize your work, but you did it yourself beautifully. I don't have to defend the transnational perspective on migration because Nina contextualized it very well, and I just, what I want to, I have many questions, and I don't know if I have many questions, but one thing that I want to point out is that the importance that we don't take concepts, models for granted. And the fact that it's important that we really do once in a while a critical evaluation of the questions we pose. And Nina and Aisha are doing exactly this. Because it depends very much from where we are, from where and when we are doing our research and our questions, and what we are, because ethnography really make us direct questions wherever you do. I am reacting to your beautiful talks. I have questions, of course, but I also read that I didn't read your book yet. I'm sorry, I need to read it. But I am also reacting to your paper, your dialogue with geographers. In fact, this dialogue we have had, students of migration and urban geographers for quite a long time. I think that Aisha has been thinking about urban spaces since the late 90s, at least. I don't know. No? She can tell us more. But I am, in fact, I met Aisha at one of these workshops about locating migration. That was a dialogue between anthropologists or studying migration and urban geographers, and was very helpful. But as I like the ideas of, in fact, when we talk about Nina's and Aisha's work, we are talking about capitalism as migration as part of capitalism formation and restructuring. So, and one question that I have, because like you are doing like a comparison between like three cases, like the national bounds were also three cases, but now you are looking at city making, and I think that from the focus from the national perspective of migration, we started to look at cities and migrants in cities. And now you are looking at migrants and non-migrants in cities and city making. So the focus, at least in the paper that I read, is much more in cities than in migrants and non-migrants. Nina brought the migrants now in her talk, but like and with a beautiful story that tells about all these multiple connections and the multiscalar connections that they are talking. But I think that like this way, this elaboration of that you are bringing, this refinement of your paradigms, I think that is very much something made in terms of three cases, or in the United States and in Europe. In fact, I think that is a perspective of the global north in relationship to the global south, as we can say. And then I'm asking you directly, because you are taking for granted that the states that you are studying are authoritarian, or you are mentioning your paradigm are authoritarian neoliberal states. And when you talk about governance, you are talking about neoliberal governance. And the cities that you chose, I don't know how you chose them, but like Manchester, or Harvey and Mardin in Turkey, they are all these impoverished, as you say, cities that had a long past of honor, of being very important, and now and for a long time they have been this important, looking for ways out, and in and I know that you chose these cities because, in fact, you started to do research, and then at least Nina, became aware of the difference between doing research in a global city, and then you started to look at this type of cities. I could place New Bedford, for instance, in this paradigm, in this model. But I have a problem when I think about the global south, when I think about my location here in São Paulo, in Brazil, or in South America, because of course we have all the influence of global neoliberal capitalism. Of course, all these processes that we are showing about precarization, dispossession, are happening here. But I think that we are living, I don't know if I can say about all the global south. First, I woke up this night thinking, which cities that are impoverished cities that in South America, and gateway cities that I could choose to do research. I don't think so. I don't think that I could find cities like this. I could find cities with high proportions of migrants in the south of Brazil, in the south of south corner of South America, I don't know if I can go, and I don't know if I find the empowered cities. I think that, I don't know. And this is something that I want to ask everyone, that is attending and that could contribute to the discussion. As also, I think that from thinking about where I am located, that yes, we have had all this precarization, but I think that we are living, I don't know if I can say that this is authoritarian neoliberal state. I think that we are still disputing between being there is a dispute between development that is not necessarily good and neoliberalism. Even at the city level, I think that there is alternance.
Can I
Yes.
answer that point, and
Yes,
and then we'll go on, because I think, Bella, you're particularly reacting to that particular paper where we were taking on geographers talking about relational comparisons. But more broadly than that, what Aisha and I were presenting today, and is in our book, is a broader methodology about how to think about transformations of space and time. And it's not about a particular type of city. The whole point is that each city is an entry point into multiscalar networks of power that wind around the world in trajectories of force that affect people everywhere. You could certainly find urban regeneration projects all through the global south as well as the north, with the same architects and the same plans. And matter of fact, one of the things that struck us looking at Mardin in Turkey, we opened up their development brochures, and we all had the brochures from Halle in Eastern Germany and Manchester, New Hampshire, 3 apparently really different cities. And the brochures are clearly from central casting. They look exactly the same. They have the same kind of graphics, the same kind of presentation, the same kind of projects. This is a global project of making, of accruing capital through rebuilding in a certain kind of way. That hasn't happened everywhere, but it's not in every city. But it has happened globally in different places in the world. And that's the process. We were trying to develop analytical tools and methodologies to study that process, so we could link the ethnographic, the life of people, to these larger structures of power and transformation. To see it's not different levels of analysis, but a single process. But that it doesn't appear in the same way, in the same place, and not at the same time either. That's why temporality is important, not epics. It's not one period.
I agree with you, and I agree with using the city as an entry point. Of course, it's a way, and I agree also with this relationship between city making and the different protagonists in the city. Okay, like I don't like this binary thing, migrants and non-migrants, because they are different protagonists. But what I'm asking them, how much is it that you are taking? Like, one thing is that neoliberal capitalism, all these investments, and when you're thinking even about the global south, you are talking about centuries of inequality. Like, the making of the city is based on inequality, on peripheries and favelas. So this is something, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. But what I am putting, and you can answer, and this is why we are here, is that like it seems in your paradigm, and I didn't read the book, so I'm sorry, but that you are taking for granted neoliberal governance. And I am saying that here, that this is in dispute. Also, it's a field of dispute. It's one of the fields of dispute right now. And also, when you talk about like migrants and non-migrants, and when you talk about, like the way that you look at displacement, I always thought, and I was thinking about this, when I think about displacement, I am thinking of in dispossession, I am thinking about different people, like indigenous people, people from the favelas, and also, Black people that are from the favelas. Migrants could live in favelas, but what I feel is that um, I think it has to do with the way that things are in the so-called New World in Latin America, because um, even in terms of social movements, we don't hear. I don't see here. One question that I have, and I am looking at social movements, in fact, particularly now in times of the pandemic, and there is also the way that you are talking, intensification of social solidarity, but an intensification also of like the awareness of structural, racial structuralism, the awareness of racialization and racism is awareness of everything. But the way that people are mobilizing are not mobilizing in terms of, I like very much the Cambridge Hotel documentary. And it could happen, these mobilizations, like in occupations, like the refugees live with other people. But the movements are very much movements of the favelados, movements of the immigrants, movements of the Black people. And my question is, how do you put them together? And I can see that, for instance, my research in New Bedford, yes, people mobilize, and migrants are sort of a point that people can mobilize in terms of the migrant question. But here is still, I think there are lots of mobilizations underground to every type of mobilization. But mobilizations are across some, thematic mobilizations, identity and not identity. And also, yeah, there are lots of, like, in terms of, instead, even if it's the governance is not neoliberal, you can see that in this period, in this conjuncture, the way, like, it's like tourism is a possibility. Is every city wants to get tourism, wants to get cultural heritage becomes important, as like its commodification of urban of but not necessarily of migrants, maybe in places that are many migrants. So I think that situation that you are putting is right, but I think that there are differences, and there are things that are really in dispute.
But the framework we're trying to propose is not about migration. That's exactly the point. We agree with you. We don't need a migration studies. We need a dispossession studies.
Exactly.
We're not trying to emphasize just migration. It's just the topic we were asked to talk about is transnational migration. So we tried to organize a talk that could say what was wrong with that scholarship, why we need a different scholarship. That's what you're arguing. It is going to look differently in different places. On one hand, cities are told to all market themselves. On the other hand, who's there, who gets mobilized around what is going to vary. But it's not a bounded unit, each city. It's part of, it's connected to these broader processes. You know this.
You know that
this is what you've done all your life.
So I'm life through
yes.
the entry of the town, of a town. I am talking about the world. You know, like,
yes,
because
exactly.
This is what I am doing. So I am also asking from my experience, my research experience, what I am doing. So, like, it's not about migration, but it's also about migration. You know, like, you know, because when I think about all these social movements and the situation of precarity that people and criminalization of poor people, in fact, when I think about São Paulo, I'm sorry, or Rio de Janeiro, may I talk about global cities? When I think about São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, the target of the global neoliberal, if you can call, policies are people from the favelas, are people from the periphery. They are more than the, you know, like, they are not this awareness of about immigrants so much. Like, these are like, you can replace immigrants by the favelados, the periphery. This is like and the same thing that you see, the policies that criminalize migrants, criminalize poor people in general. So this is
exactly, but we're not contesting that.
Exactly,
Bella.
but this is the point. So sorry if I didn't read your book.
Yeah, we agree with you.
But I am bringing mind questioning. You know, like. So this is like some points of that I want to make, you know, and I don't know. Like, it's beautiful. You can. I would like to know more how you get social movements in the cities that get every different type of people, independently of color or class, in terms of for social justice. Like, what is happening, and probably I'm talking from here. Like, we are like in a. I think that, you know, it's important to think in terms of this analysis. The disputes, not only the paradox, but the disputes, the violence, the criminalization. I miss this from your talk, you know, like dispossession comes with violence. I miss it in your talk, I think. You know, like, I would like to know more about this, you know, about these social movements. I don't know. And one thing that, and I, you know, like, from, I didn't read your book, but I think that your work is very much like the concern with space is much better elaborated than
the what?
The concern with space, the spatial connections are much better elaborated than the temporal connections, the temporal conjuncture. It's a little bit, I really need more explanations because I don't know if I got it well. And also throwing out like emic, the way that people see, for instance, concepts like diaspora. How can you explain, like, you are a student, or was a student of Asian migration, the diaspora, the concept of diaspora is so important for them as family key projects of migration. So I don't know, maybe I am still hung up in migration, but I also think that you cannot just throw out migration or throw out, you know, favelados, you have all these protagonists that I don't know who are
It's-
in your,
Uh,
besides the,
Aisha, do you want to say something?
because you mentioned my immigrant, a story, a couple of the Congo, and I really want to know more. Yes, Aisha.
I'd like to say some words before passing the floor to Aisha, because I'm seeing that she wants to talk, and I have prepared before a question, and I think that my question has a lot to do with Bella's question also. Um, um, I would like to present a question related to your proposal. It's also a concern of mine, very much situated in the field work that I carry out here in São Paulo. Starting from the criticism on transnational studies regarding the lack of ways to relate and to link migrants and non-migrants in the same theoretical framework, I would like you to deepen the debate on how to analyze the specificity of the migratory experience without exoticizing this interlocutor. If you mobilize a series of notions and concepts to frame the connections and relations between migrants and non-migrants, without transforming migrants into subjects taken as external and exterior to the urban order, at the same time, I would like to know how to evidence the existing conflicts between populations with different collective histories and with different subjectivities that take place in the city. How not to lose the migrants' own experience and specificities in their emplacement process to the city. And I think that I'd like to ask also how to, because here in Sao Paulo we see, and that's really true what Bella is saying, that the social movements, they used to be very comparted, very bounded. Sometimes it's quite difficult to have a lot of alliance and to do the dialogue between migrants and non-migrants. Or in the case of the movie that you talked before, Aisha, it's a very specific case, and I think that's a very nice case, very good material to think about it. Yeah, now I think that you can.
Okay. Okay. I think, I will first go to Bella's couple of points that Bella raised. I hear that, first of all, I think there are a couple of misunderstandings, I think, Bella, because even that I'm not sure, because sometimes I think that what you think that what we are doing, I don't think that this is what we are doing. But on the other hand, sometimes you plea for certain things, and this is exactly what we are doing. So that's why I'm very confused. First of all, definitely no one is saying that Germany, Turkey, and US are same places. We are very aware that they are not the same places.
I know.
Yes. But you are saying that maybe you were able to find those kind of places in those cities, these kind of cities in those places. But when you come to the kind of the global South or Latin America or Brazil, I'm not sure whether there would be any kind of that kind of city. So if you ask me, it all depends how you approach and with what kind of parameters you're looking at. Of course, when I tell this, that the people in Halle that I compared them with Mardin, they're up in the, no one is happy with that. No one is happy. So because they're not bothered maybe with the comparison with US, but the scholars will be bothered, not the people. So there are, this is definitely whatever that we looked at it in terms of those three cities, which is unfair to the people who are listening now, because we didn't talk about it. So this is about the book. So but if you want to say that this is not happening, there isn't, I can't think of neoliberal urban governance. I hear you. What bothers you? That's why I said that I'm not talking about a kind of a template. I'm also very reluctant to use neoliberal as a kind of a catchword, as a sponge. But on the other hand, that is why I went over exactly, and Nina also hinted at, that what kind of characteristics we are taking it. In terms of the governance structures, there might be X number of variations. I mean, of course, I understand the people. Marlene is not Halle, that the conditions are not that way. But on the other hand, I mean, Halle doesn't have those kind of hotels. Marlene had a Hilton at the end of the, with the middle of nowhere. So that is, of course, there are variations, but it depends on how you look at it. That's why I said that looking at the state is in terms of statecraft, how it organizes how it mediates actually capital accumulation, how it organizes certain institutions, but not by itself also, but where its weight is there, where its weight is a little bit drawn back. And if I compare kind of the places that in several places in Europe also, but also looking at Turkey, it is a very different kind of, I mean, it's a very different kinds of state development which works with particular logics. Yes, there is violence. That's exactly what I said. It is not only massive dispossessions, I said that it is massive violence. And it is actually, this is this kind of, it is not just simply saying that Nina referred that the brochures looked very similar, but it doesn't say that the dynamics, I mean, there are no differences in that. So I don't think that this is what you're saying, that you have here centuries of inequality. I think every city has a centuries of inequality. No city is being built unless, I mean, outside of inequality. So, but it depends on how the inequalities take shape and how they are produced also. That is why I think it was important to refer to the way that we approach to the dispossession, and you're saying that yes, when I think about dispossession, only the favelas, I mean the favelas or indigenous, but dispossession is not in the monopoly of anyone.
No,
so
no, I think that dispossession is happening everywhere.
Yes, but depends on how it is happening. That is why I don't want to take it that because you can't have capital accumulation without dispossession in any case. So then I should make it as a kind of a one narrative. I don't understand that. I don't want to go more onto that, but in terms of when you're talking about the social movements, you said that you see, yes, intensification of solidarity, but intensification of divides. Exactly, this is what we are saying. We see the similar kind of intensifications, but that's why I said the polarized politics.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Okay. In terms of the diasporas, we said that what would you teach your students in terms of diasporas? I will start teaching, I mean, diasporas in terms of that the theories and then everything and then examples, but then immediately I will give them World Bank documents about diasporas and how diasporas are to be untapped resources and how that diasporas are actually the forms that they take are not outside of those kind of industries, those kinds of institutional institutional networks. So I give one example. In terms of those diasporas, of course, you have the best practices, good diasporas, bad diasporas, and how to mediate diasporas. I'm not saying that the migrants are doing it because of that, but you cannot understand why in certain places that the people started talking about establishing diasporas. And yes, in terms of the diasporas don't exist by themselves, that other than in the imaginaries and certain kinds of networks, they have to be translated into the certain kind of networks, and those translations are, with a little bit of a help from our friends, comes in certain times. I'm not saying that it was always like that, but this is to not to romanticize kind of the diasporas. That is why I would do that. I'm not saying that you are romanticizing, but you said that, but the diasporas are very important. Yes, of course. It is like ethnicity. Ethnicity is also very real for the people, but I'm not going to take that lens in terms of as the most defining characteristics of these people.
Okay.
And there was another question, Aisha, Arthur's question about
I'm
subjectivity.
sorry. We are not talking the same language, I think. I am thinking like the old differentiation between ethics and emics.
Yes. Okay. Well, okay. Then I heard it very well.
We have taken account what people say, how they live. This is also the way to understand their subjectivity.
Yes.
This is also,
Yes. Okay. This is good that you reminded me, because I was thinking of that. This is exactly that why I started, for example, in terms of the narratives about themselves, also narratives about them. So these kind of emic views are of course mediated. Also, these subjectivities are products of certain. That's why I said that for the diasporic understandings, they are the products of a process where certain institutions, institutional and non-institutional actors are involved.
Can I say something about that too? Because the point is not to negate that this is one of the subjectivities.
No.
It's not the only one.
it's not.
Only one, and it's very important to say that when you raise that very important question, how do we build broader movements against all forms of oppression? And the only way to see how the seeds of that happen is to see that people have multiple identities. I know you know this, Bella, and that's all we're saying. And transnational migration scholarship tends to only push one. It's not that that doesn't exist. It's not that it can exist for and do long distance nationalism and fund horrible wars. It can do all kinds of struggles against oppression, but it's not the only way people live their lives. And that's why I point out that, let me just, the question, now Arthur asked about subjectivities. That's why I pointed out the experience of Hubert and Helene. They're not that exceptional. They're extraordinarily brave people, but they have these multiple identities. When faced with this real problem, they built on these multiple identities. In fact, they build their lives around these multiple identities. That's what we found in all our surveys. And the reason other migration researchers, not you have it all, but in your film and writings, but so many migration researchers haven't asked about these multiple networks and identities. And in the US, what's interesting as compared to what you're talking about, these fractured social movements, the US, where social movements have been less developed and in recent generations than in Brazil, there's black activists have taken the lead, and they have led broad movements of people of all backgrounds. This is very interesting. It can be, it's fragile. It can be fractured, but it is definitely there. It is definitely there. You could see it all through all those demonstrations for Black Lives Matter, which were not only Black people and not even only youth, even in the middle of the pandemic. This is something happening that we have to understand, and why it happened, and in the midst, and it has something to do with this emergence of an authoritarian fascist leader, Trump. And somehow that brought together people understanding their common oppression. But we have to understand these common dispossessive forces and give it a language too, because if you don't have an analysis of the nature of capitalism and how it's dispossessing people and forcing this downward mobility and this rage, if you don't have this language, then you do end up fracturing into identity politics.
Okay,
That's the alternative.
I use so much accumulation by dispossession and also expulsions, assassins expulsions. This is why you cannot talk, write about or think about without these concepts.
Yes, we refer to it.
We agree.
Yeah.
We agree.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we have other questions and comments here from our audience. I'd like to read it for you, if it's okay. I don't know.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Patricia asked, how can we establish a conversation about present or recent events without silencing or flattening very different historical pasts? And
I didn't understand.
No, you didn't understand?
I should put on the caption function.
How can we establish a conversation about present?
Well, how do you do this?
Just on the bottom of the screen, it says caption.
No, I don't have.
Okay, so I'm just writing it here, and so you can read it. How can we establish a conversation about present or recent events without silencing or flattering very different historical pasts?
Well, let me start, because I can hear the question. I can see the question.
We do have other comments. I'm going to read the other ones.
Okay.
Another comment about the conversation that we were having before. Patricia said, I guess this is what is troubling the conversation, this debate. The historical paradigm informing the configuration of cities and migration in each place constitute a problematic starting point. And Pedro Corrales said that this is happening now in Tel Aviv, an amazing alliance between refugees from Eritrea and Sudan, the Mizrahi Jewish community and Palestinians against gentrification and racism. Fundamental, Professor Aisha. So, yes, please, Nina.
Let me see the third question. I didn't see the last. I didn't hear the last question, and the type is disappearing.
Yeah, no, there was just one question. The other
something about Israel and Eritrea and the Sudan.
It was just a comment, not a question.
Actually, Thiago, if you allow me, there are more questions from Christine Pieschi. She wrote in Portuguese, so I can try to translate it.
Well, maybe we should address the first three quickly, and then.
Okay, whatever you prefer.
Let me try the first three, and Aisha, you can do the next three.
Yes. And I will respond also to Tiago's question.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see if I can now reconstruct it. Now I've lost Tiago's question. Let me talk about not flattening the very different historical past and talk about the current. I mean, the last thing we want to do is flatten the past. That's why Aisha and I have been talking about temporality. That's what was wrong with the transnational migration paradigm. Even when we were speaking to a particular conjuncture, we didn't have a sense of the ongoing restructuring of capitalism since its beginnings and the expansion of expansion of Europe. And actually, dispossessive processes go back to the origins of the state and the origins of and the history of empire. So dispossession by political forces and subsequent migrations is part of the history of the world, and it looks different in different places, and it happens in different times in different places. So if we have an analysis of these forces and how forces of power are constructed, then we understand how the differences between places is constructed within larger processes that span space and that extend over time. So we need the broader view and the longue durée to be able to talk about these processes. But our call is not a new call. It's a maintenance of an old discussion where we need a global perspective and a sense of the longue durée to be able to understand these forces, including the history of particular cities. Cities have never existed in a vacuum. They've always been constructed by migration, rural, urban migration. Once we take out the international, then some of what Bella was raising about favelas, but and you put in the question of migration from the countryside to the city and ask why. Why is there migration from countryside to the city at a particular time? That goes back to my Haitian apples. The peasants had to leave their land, or the farmers, small farmers had to leave their land and go to the city because they were selling apples in the city. You have to put the two things together, the rural-urban migration and what happened to this restructuring. So this perspective and this language is a methodological language to speak to these questions, not to destroy history, but to be able to compare the different processes and see the larger forces. Let me see what else was there. Aisha, you want to take it from there?
I would like to add something, because in addition to what Nina is saying, that definitely this is not an idea of negating the historical processes. I think that's why I was saying that just looking at these tectonic shifts will not do, because what comes after and what was the ground actually makes a difference. But on the other hand, there is a kind of the way that if you are saying that conversation about present or recent events might be the entry point, but it is not an understanding of an historical past as path dependencies. So that, and also that every place only looks at, resembles itself. So if you want not to only construct through that kind of the histories from within, then I think there is a problem. There would be a difference from our perspective of approaching histories, because it is more in the sense of global histories that we are looking at it. Of course, histories are also written from, even the documents like the subaltern studies. How did they come into being? They started looking through very different kinds of documents. So it is always, there is that kind of the silencing, but it is not a kind of negating that the histories, but it is not a historicism. This is not a historicist understanding or approach looking at the cities and the migrants. And migrants' histories and cities' histories come together, but they come together not naturally. In terms of, there is a kind of naturally, of course, they come together naturally, because you can't have cities without the migrants, but they come within a particular configuration. There is no, that brings me to the question of specificity of migrancy. that Tiago is asking,
Oh.
I think this is important. This is not negating the specificity, but you do not start, I mean, at least what we are saying is that we are not starting from an assumed specificity, which gives a unity to all the migrants. And there is not that kind of a generic migrant experience. Like now, there is no generic non-migrant experience. So this is again like not negating it, but where you start and with what kind of a priori assumptions you operate. So of course, migrants might have very different kind of specificity depending on when and where, and in relation to whom.
Exactly.
So I will stop there.
Nice. Thank you very much, Aisha and Nina. Do you have any comments, Bella, or can I read the other question that the audience?
I have one question.
Okay, so
Where is gender?
gender is not.
Gender. You have race,
Gen-
you have class, gender in the analysis. I don't know. I am asking.
the gender is this framework is something that allows us to understand the specificities and the positioning in terms of gender too. I mean, this is when I say people have multiple identities, and they actuate and they act on them in different ways and at different times. That's another reason why we critique the ethnic lens, because it leaves out the variations of gender that can tie women across ethnicities or women of the same ethnicity, as different from men. You need a sense of social positioning as it is positioned within multiscalar networks. Gender is a relationship. Ours is a relational analysis of differential power. Gender is a relationship of differential power. So it is one of the many relationships of differential power we're trying to theorize. We're trying to develop a broader language that takes us out of each specificity without denying it by looking at relational. I mean, it's really an old-fashioned social anthropology that looks at people as social actors within relationships of power, which is what social anthropology can be. And that's what it is, and that's what we're trying to do. It doesn't deny the subjectivities of, this is back to Professor Baddock's pick. It doesn't deny people's subjectivities, but it tries to understand how they're creating those subjectivities within a particular time and space. And they don't come from nowhere. They come from these differential relationships. That when I made the point of saying I share this paper with Hubert and Helene, it's because I understand that their subjectivities are different, but we also share, there's a lot we share. We come from very different worlds. There's a lot we share. We try to understand those meeting points, and then they can see the points of difference too, So one of the ways we have to get ourselves politically as well as intellectually out of the binary is putting aside binaries of difference and trying to understand social relations.
There is one question that is about should the political participation of migrants in local elections as voters at least be considered an important strategy to enable them to be recognized as a social pressure group? Of course, not only social pressure group, it gives a political voice. It gives a voice, a political voice. It is not the only form of political voice, but it is a very important political voice. And let me give you an example. I mean, in Vienna, 1/3 of the population could not vote. So then you are excluding the people in terms of their participation into the social a social, political, and of course the economic life. So if we are connecting, so definitely, but not as a kind of, and then considering that this participation could directly contribute to the construction of official public space for the inclusion of new subjectivities and narratives. And there, I actually think that rather than, this is what we have been seeing it, rather than secluded parts, secluded kind of spaces, facilities, support to organize and express themselves as a kind of a community given beforehand, not as a heterogeneous community, as on the ethnic basis, on the religious basis. I'm not so sure this is the best way to participate in the social and political life. And we saw that actually, I think that in the disempowered cities that we have looked at, actually they were able to, because there were no facilities, no possibilities to organize in terms of on ethnic lines and religious lines, they became part of the local politics rather than community politics.
Yeah, can I just say something about that? I wanted to, I forgot to say when I was talking about Manchester and its regeneration, that part of what facilitated the multiscalar networks that Hubert and Helene were able to build was the fact that the city in its regeneration had to create a public narrative that everyone belongs in this city, that migrants are citizens of Manchester, that that the city was built by migrants. They created this public narrative. They didn't have it was a very poor city. They didn't provide any resources for ethnic organizing or social services to provide for migrants particularly. They didn't provide any resources for most of the population. But they did have this narrative, and it did make a difference. And it structured the way people at that time in 2000 to 2010-ish, even past 9/11, felt comfortable in the city. They didn't feel that the political leaders were targeting them. And so they could look for ways of building relationships in the city. And this was especially in the Republican Party. And the Republican Party actually became a place where migrants rose and became state legislatures. One of the first Muslim legislators in the United States came from the city of Manchester, as well as someone from the Dominican Republic. This changed dramatically. That's why we need not a timeless narrative of a city, but looking at the conjuncture as both the global situation and reflected politics change. Migrants feel less and less welcome there in general, and certainly not by the Republican Party. On the other hand, one of the pictures, you can see in the social movements that the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and support movements in support of asylum seekers happened in the streets of Manchester with migrants and non-migrants together in the city in 2016 and 2017 and 2018. And so that specificity of looking at the regeneration processes and the quest to compete for capital has something to do with the way people interact politically in the city, and including electoral politics.
Thank you, Nina. Karina, do you want to ask your question? I think that you can read it to everybody.
Okay, if we have time, it's very quick. I think I was curious and very interested. The both presentations was very, very rich. and specifically about the concept that Nina presented for us, the idea of disposariat. I would like to know if it has a dialogue with the idea of precariat, and what is the current role of labor category on this whole analysis? Thank you.
Okay. Just briefly, precariat.
One second, Nina. I'd like to read the last question, and then I think that you can make your last considerations, and then we go to close our panel, because I know that for Aisha it's almost 10. She's in Vienna. It's not so. So Bianca Freire Medeiros, she's a professor. She asked, I'd like to thank Professor Chagler and Glick-Schiller for the excellent presentations, Professor Bella for her comments, and Tiago and Karina for putting this wonderful panel together. And then she asked, a question for both presenters. You suggest a multiescalar analysis that is attentive to temporal frames, and this sounds very compelling. And then she asks, but in more empirical terms, how to identify what ties the different scales together across time and space?
Good question.
Okay. Let me talk about the disposariat question. Maybe Aisha, you want to talk about scales across time and space. I putting out that word because precariat to me doesn't link to a particular process, economic and political process. It just says people are shaky. It's a descriptive term. Capitalism leads to a precarious life for people. It always has, and it always will. I was trying to then move the theory ahead a little by saying, well, what is it leading people from who were in the middle class, who see themselves in the middle class, or in the US workers who see themselves as middle class people, and suddenly and people who have very peripheral jobs, who are barely in the labor market? What is putting them all into political motion? What is happening? And when they form actual sociabilities, like if we look at Hubert and Helene's personal network, it went across class, and it went to people who had lost their job or were disabled. When we looked at the migrants and the social networks they made, they were people who, over and over again, and gender was in there, Bella, were facing dispossession in terms of their social positioning and various forms of mobility or precarity that was linked to the restructuring of the city and the dispossessive processes going on in the city. So to me, the term is a little bit more precise in terms of linking the process of dispossession and displacement from the processes of accumulation of capital to describe a group of people who are in motion, although they may choose different politics, but they're in political motion and a lot of rage. And that's what I'm trying to do. I hope that's clear. Aisha, go ahead.
Okay. Could you read the question again? But in more empirical terms, how to identify? Sorry. I'm not gonna do the sounds right. In terms how to identify the ties the different scales together across time and space. I mean, actually, it does not tie all the different scales together in the same way across time. That is what actually the conjunctural analysis is. The different scales are tied differently depending on the conjunctural depending on the conjuncture. That is why I gave that the example of the state. I mean, in terms of the where that this is how, let me give you this way, answer this way. If you want to, if I give an example from Martin, then within that, in the 2000s, where there was this kind of the urban regeneration, and then the kind of the urban governance had different, although I would be cautious because state was always in it, but giving different kinds of leeways. So there, the city officials or authorities that are city leaders, they were able to acquire and reach the Turkish state, acquire a good a positionality vis-a-vis the Turkish state over supranational networks, over global religious networks, and EU networks. So it did not go through the Turkish state. But now it is very difficult. So that's why to do that, and that's why I gave the example that the elected mayor is removed, the budget is in the control of the central government. So the multiscalar networks, so the relations different, how those different scales come together is conjunctional. It is not a kind of the across time. That's why we talk about multiscalar, but multiscalar does not refer to fixed scalar relationships. So there is a kind of the how different scales relate to each other is variable, and that is very much dependent on the historical conjunctures. That is what I would say in terms of you can't have it across time and across space. Actually, this is the difficulty.
Thank you, Aisha. Bella, would you like to say any words to close your presentation, your comments, last comments, before I pass the floor to Matuki? Hey, our microphone is off.
What I feel, I should read the book and then talk to you people, because I read a paper that was not really to the point, maybe, And but I like a discussion. I like to provoke, and I like to learn. So I think that's great to have you, and I'm looking forward to more dialogues, maybe presentially at some point. Thank you for inviting me, Tiago, Karina, Tur.
Thank you, Bella.
We thank you that you
Yeah.
also.
We thank you. Thank everyone.
Yes.
Well, Artur, would you like to say some words now? We're going to close our roundtable.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
please.
Thank you, Bella and Aisha and Nina. I'm very pleased to have had this discussion with you. It was very, very nice. I think that everybody here learned a lot. I just
And
thank you.
the book is online, by the way. It's free. So
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Ah,
We are going to post it in our YouTube. If you have the link to send us.
yeah, we'll send it. It's in the links in
Okay.
our email.
Okay. Artur, please.
Well, good evening to all of you. Close here in my screen and far away in the other platforms. As a general coordinator of this forum, I'm very happy to participate in the closing of this third edition, which the forum has provided more and more a meeting between the critical production of knowledge in the humanities, in arts, performance, even celebrations. Well, this final section was an excellent example. Thanks to Nina Glick-Schiller, Isa Saglar, and Bella Feldman. For me, this session demonstrates we need a radical change in the institution of science. I'm teaching a graduate discipline in USP, University of São Paulo, about outer science. The proposals discussed here today shows that a compassionate perspective towards humans could change the paradigms of science, human sciences. But for scientists or hard scientists, it's very difficult, even impossible, to reveal that their assumptions are based on humanistic perspectives. Because I think that science is so much marked and dominated by positivism. Well, that was my opinion. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about this. Now, I would like to mention some background on Fronteiras Cruzadas. First, the Collabor was a research group designed for decentralization and collaboration. This group, which I founded in 2003 at the University of São Paulo, produced for more than a decade the event called Acta Media, a symposium on media arts and digital culture. Our forum, Fronteiras Cruzadas, was also born from the Collabor group, somehow, in the School of Communication and Arts at the University of São Paulo. Another important work was the Migranto human scale puppet representing an immigrant who emerged in 2017 from the same milieu, the same conversations, in a joint work with Paulo Zeminian, who is the builder of giant puppets. Maybe, if we could show an image of the Migranto, it will be interesting. Furthermore, I'm now teaching also a graduate class in performance art in the expanded field, which will have a new edition starting this month on April 15 at USP, and it's open for people to participate. This class and my background in performance art also give us the opportunity and allow us to have many different encounters with the Teatro Oficina, with African artists of performances, and also we were able to produce events and workshops in the Immigrants Shelter House in downtown São Paulo, and also create events with the Sesc Cultural Center. So that was a connection between performance art and immigration. My present research focuses on multilingual literature and dramaturgy, and has come to life also through my involvement with immigrants and their cultures. And it has been very challenging to organize online the third edition of Fronteiras Cruzadas in this context of crisis and pandemic, but I believe we have made a quantitative and qualitative leap. We were summoned to reflect and propose directions about this crisis scenario. We set up a continuous program in dialogue and with research groups from USP, UNICAMP, and abroad, and in direct dialogue with social movements and immigrant collectives to take joint strategies for social transformation, which was the theme of this edition. Despite the wide reach that the online version of the forum achieved, we also face inequalities in internet access. Some immigrants had connection problems, and it was more difficult to mobilize among recently arrived immigrants from the Casa de Assis Shelter Center, who had always actively participated in our forum. On the other hand, we had a great geographic diversity. people participated from many different states in Brazil and even abroad. With the COVID health crisis, the network of researchers and people connected to this academic forum has demonstrated merit and relevance in the interdisciplinary field of social sciences and humanities, being requested to face a serious social crisis. This networking is consolidating the International Forum as a reference for scientific research in graduate studies in dialogue with law, sociology, history, modern and traditional languages, communication, health, social welfare, public management, art, and education. In addition, the forum sought to establish partnerships with national and international research groups in order to create a collaborative platform for solidarity actions together with the Sergio Vieira de Mello Chair at UNICAMP, and also with academic seminars, the seminar on city street vendors, university extension projects at UNICAMP, editorial projects, and so on, and artistic activities. Our concept is that the forum does not end in lives, but continues to reverberate through new connections and universities to be a living space that actually contributes to society. We will also publish the annals now being organized. We certainly have plans to continue the annual event, but also to offer courses, workshops, and so on. Fronteiras Cruzadas is now an extension project at UNICAMP, which has produced the beautiful Sarau Multicultural Online, which actually happens tomorrow, and you are all invited. Sarau Multicultural means a music and poetry multicultural festival, and it will happen tomorrow. Despite the social distance, I believe we have managed to create a welcoming environment for the exchange of experiences, which will continue to be available online and hopefully in actual presence soon, we hope. I just want to mention that I produced a video documentary, which was the theme of our last section, which is called The Retained, the Unseen, the Unheard. And then I came to this idea, like contacting immigrants in Sao Paulo, mainly from Africa. But I thought, well, maybe some of them never were able to come to Brazil, you know, and then I asked some of them to record what they know about people who are not able to come to Brazil or to any other country to improve their lives. And then we made this documentary, which is, for me, was very kind of simple, low budget, with the help of friends in editing and recording, and with the help of these immigrants in talking. And I think I heard, and it came to life in my consciousness, that yes, there was many immigrants that were never able to become immigrants. They wished to be so. And that was very enriching. And today, one of the first things I heard, I think was from Nina, was that the tragedy, the drama of separated families, which I think it's a very connected issue, but I never imagined, you know, and I wish I would have the opportunity to interview parents who are able to immigrate, but they were forced to leave their families, their children behind. And I think that touched my heart, this example that I think Nina gave to us. So thank you very much for everything. And that was my final words. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, everybody. And good evening, good night. And That is it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.